Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to Let's Start Story on What If Harry and Hermione Went Back in Time to Save His Parents, so do 4 Blue Hearts comment. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video and please share with your friends and watch till end. Also check out Patreon for I have upload Harry x Hermione. Uncensored spicy version, link in description. Hermione Granger sat in the Gryffindor common room late one night, studying. Okay, the swelling solution takes, tail of a tadpole. She thought. Hermione looked over at the girls. Lavender Brown and Parvati Patel conversing on boys. Hermione had never been the kind to think of boys all that much, though her 2 best friends, Harry and Ron, were boys. As far as she was concerned, there was plenty of time for boys after school and she didn't care to take part in any so-called relationships right now anyway. Although she did feel rather strange around a certain guy, she didn't think too deeply of it. I mean, he's just a guy, right? It'll pass, even if it is a crush. She told herself, he likes Miss Chong A Lang anyway, it'll pass. Okay, back to Postion's crushed bee. Eagle eyes, that are maybe green, her eyes began to go misty as her train of thought took flight, just like his. No. I need to think about potions. Next thing I'll be having trouble saying any word W-I-T-H-N-H, without thinking about him, and I have more important things to think about, and they do not include Harry and his Kung Fu girl. No, she thought angrily, I will not sink so low as to insult her. I don't even know her. I mean, he doesn't like me and that's that, right? Okay, fresh toad warts, and black cat hair, that's all messy, and black and what if I told Harry how I feel? He'd probably just say, Hermione, get back to your potions. No, he'd say, well, more he'd think, she's just a know-it-all. I hate that, everyone acts as though I don't put forth any effort. Hermione slumped low in her chair. Like I just lay my hind on a book and remember it all. Or worse yet, that I lay my palm on my homework and it fills itself out instantly without any work on my part. It's just that I try, more than others, she added, casting a disgusted look at the 2 girls giggling in the corner. Now that's why they make low scores, too busy talking about who has the cutest butt, although. Harry, I don't think of Harry like that, more that he has that nerdy grin that makes your knees go to butter. And Hermione, get back to your potions homework. She scolded herself, you've been on the same problem for 10 minuets. She began to scribble down the ingredients to the potions she needed to prepare the next day but found that every word she had meant to write had turned into Harry, and every word had accidentally become Potter. She slammed her quill down on the table with such force the whole common room turned to look at her. Feeling quite embarrassed by her loss of temper, Hermione threw her things in her bag and headed up to her dormitory to finish her Harry Potter IZED homework. I'm going to grow up and marry a nice doctor, she told herself, chucking her books on her 4-poster in aggravation. And Harry's not a doctor. Wait, she thought, he couldn't be, he hasn't finished school yet. There I go thinking, logically. Again, Hermione walked to Parvati's overlarge mirror. She had always thought it was rather pointless. All you needed to see in a mirror was yourself, not you and the whole rest of the dormitory wall behind you. Hermione had never been anywhere near superficial. In fact, Hermione couldn't care less about what she looked like or what other people thought of her, except when it came to schoolwork. Everyone agreed with Hermione, that gave her the correct impression that all her ideas were great. She held her hair back and pictured herself in a wedding dress on her big day. Hermione Potter, she thought, now what's so wrong with that? Ione lay down on her bed and convinced herself she would talk to Harry tomorrow. Though she didn't intend to, it made it much easier to concentrate on her work. Every once in a while she would erase a word and rewrite hair of a caterpillar. Or porcupine quills. It didn't faze her as much as it had before though. The following morning at breakfast, however, she found herself trying once more to concentrate hard on the thought that she had nothing to do with Harry. We're just good friends, that's all, she reassured herself, quickly whipping porridge off her knife and picking up her spoon. I mean, if I liked him I would have realized it before, right? Hermione found the fact that she continued to ask herself these questions quite aggravating. She didn't have time to brood, however, because a moment later her 2 best friends, Harry and Ron, walked in. Ron was tall and lean, and was easy to spot in a crowd like the Great Hall because of his flaming red hair. He was one of 7 and strained to shine around his other head boy and Quidditch Cup brothers. Harry, however, had deep green eyes, which seemed as though they were more than just there. His hair was almost cute, it looked more like a very grumpy black porcupine than anything, and stuck out in all directions. Harry, unlike Ron, had no reason to strain for greatness. It was almost like trouble followed him around. He had now escaped the Dark Lord 4 times and had drained him of his powers 14 years ago. But now Lord Voldemort was back, and the only safe place was here, Hogwarts. With Dumbledore headmaster, the Dark Lord dare not attack. Harry had many encounters, all of which he had barely survived. He was brave and famous, yet very modest. Hermione had had her share of danger with Harry as a friend, even with her great respect for rules. Hermione had vowed when she came to Hogwarts to do as she was told and never break a single rule. But now, with all her points scored and risks that led to heroism, she had broken what he believed must be a record share with 2 other people. Harry and Ron were tall, and had buffed out. Of course all boys did at this age. She always felt dwarfed and rather slim next to them. "How come you didn't wait for us?" Ron yawned, taking a seat next to Harry, who had already slumped down next to Hermione. "Sorry," Hermione said apologetically, thinking fast, "I had to have a quick word with Professor McGonagall." Hermione didn't normally lie to her friends, but she wasn't about to say, "Well, I was thinking about how much I loved Harry and couldn't sit still long enough, so I went to at some breakfast to take my mind off how gorgeous he is." She didn't fancy sounding stupid. Unlike some girls, she sighed as she heard Lavender giggle in a way that told Hermione there was a guy around. "I'd tell him, but..." She followed Harry's gaze to the Ravenclaw table where Cho Chang sat and frowned. "He likes her, and I'm proud of who I am and don't feel like changing my name to Yang, or Ming, besides. Chong isn't a name, it's a sound effect, like Ping." She giggled. "Hermione Ping. I personally like Hermione Potter," she thought, stealing a glance at Harry as he started on his eggs. Hermione left Ron and Harry on the 3rd floor as she headed to arithmecy. "Oi, Hermione." It was Fred and George. "Yes?" she asked, slightly bewildered. She didn't talk to Fred and George much. "It's about Harry," George began. "And the Quidditch team. Well, there's only 4 of us left and Oliver's gone. Bless him," George muttered, "and Harry's in the running for team captain." Fred whispered, looking around to check they were alone. "Alicia dropped out, says Harry deserves to be captain. And we're with her," Fred finished. "So why are you telling me this?" Hermione asked, not following their example and talking in a normal tone. Which caused Fred to place his finger on his lips. "Well, at least one of us has to be in the running and George already dropped out. We just want you to spread it around code for Harry." "Okay," Fred said as though this was a big deal. "Well, I do want Harry to be Quidditch captain, if that's what he wants," she reasoned aloud. "Okay then, spread the word," George said loudly, and they turned the corner and disappeared. Hermione headed back to the common room for her transfiguration books, thinking about what the twins had said. If that's what Harry wanted, then yes, she would vote for him. But if he didn't want that kind of pressure, then an idea struck her with such force she was nearly knocked off her feet. Quidditch Harry, oh why hadn't she seen it before? If she joined the Quidditch team, she was sure to get closer to him. Of course it would take time and planning and careful plotting. With this in her mind, Hermione raced back to the common room. She found Harry and Ron in an argument with Fred and George. "Why are you letting me humiliate myself like this?" Harry was yelling incredulously. "You know I won't win. I'm dropping out." "You can't, Harry. And you have my vote," Fred said, obviously annoyed that Harry didn't find this beneficial. Harry threw his arms in the air in surrender and stormed off to the other end of the common room. "He's the youngest player on the team. You think people are going to believe he can run a Quidditch team?" Ron bellowed. "I believe he can," George said, pointing a finger at his own chest in aggravation. "Yes, well." Ron was cut short by a sudden yell from the portrait hole. "Vote for Harry," Hermione screeched, the Gryffindor seeker. She magic-ed 50 or so badges in her hand and began handing them out, slowly working her way over to the twins' grinning faces and Ron's narrowed eyes. "You don't believe he can do it, do you?" Hermione said in a deadly whisper, gabbing her finger at Ron's chest. He stumbled backwards at her response. No, I mean yes. He just doesn't. Well, maybe if you believed in him as his best friend he would too. Hermione scowled before joining Harry at the other end of the common room. You have my vote, she said timidly. No kidding, said Harry with a faint grin. And I'm sure you have Ron's vote too, she continued through slightly clenched teeth as Ron joined them. Ron settled uneasily into a chair as far from Hermione as he could under her meaningful glare. Yeah, Harry, I believe you can do it. Ron smiled weakly and Hermione smiled at Harry. The following Saturday morning Ron and Hermione made their way down to the Great Hall for breakfast. And like always Harry's eyes were firmly locked on the Ravenclaw table. Hermione, could I talk to you? Hermione's heart leapt as she dropped her spoon with a clatter. Sure, she said, jumping from her chair as Harry led her out the oak front doors and onto the lawn. Harry slowed by the lake and turned to look at her. I feel that you're one of the only girls I can really talk to. Hermione blushed. And I need to know, what do girls consider a good time, he continued. Hermione felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. This was not at all what she had hoped he would say. Instantly she knew what he was talking about. Well, Harry, I'm not like other girls, she said, trying hard to keep bitterness in her voice to a bare minimum and turning to the lake. Harry, do you think of me as a friend? She asked, trying hard to avoid his eyes. He shifted uncomfortably next to her. A beautiful friend, he said honestly. Hermione smiled but turned the other way to face Hagrid's cabin. And if truth be told that is more of a wish, Harry's voice trailed off. Hermione looked at him in her puzzlement. What I mean is, he said, reading her expression, I wish I could see you just as a beautiful friend. I dunno, sometimes, I'm pretty sure I see more. He smiled and Hermione felt her knees turn to butter. Slowly Harry bent his head, and out of instincts, Hermione closed her eyes and then. Harry. Hermione. It was Ron, where have you been? What were you doing? He asked suspiciously. Harry and Hermione were both facing him, trying hard not to look guilty. I was asking Hermione what Cho would think of flowers, Harry said confidently. Hermione forced a smile and nodded in agreement. He almost kissed me, she thought as Harry made the suggestion to visit Hagrid, which Hermione only half heard. Wow, so maybe he does have feelings for me. But from what she had heard he wished he didn't. Then Hermione reminded herself of what she had said 5 days ago and realized that she didn't want feelings for him either. All the same, the fact that they had so much in common made her smile. Hermione had her reasons for wanting Harry to become captain. Of course, she didn't like to fly, but if it meant more Harry then she was all for it. Not only would Harry be choosing his team as captain, he would also be obligated to help his teammates and take time with them. And if things went how Hermione wanted them to, she would need a lot of help. Hermione dropped her vote in the box and awaited the count done by Lee Jordan. He and 3 other Gryffindors sat at a small circular table as the crowd watched with bated breath. Finally, Lee stood up and cleared his throat loudly. Instantly the only noise, which came from some exited first years, ceased. It was close, he began importantly, very, very close. The crowd drew a breath as one. In fact, it was so close that I was having trouble breathing, that's how close it was. Hermione sat next to Harry along with Fred and George, who seemed unfazed. And when I say it was close, I don't just mean close, I mean really, really close. He drew a breath and continued as people began to moan in aggravation. I wish I could tell you how really close it was. He shook his head and began to pace. I just sat there counting. And the only thing that came to me was, wow, this is close. And then, nearly thinking it was a tie, I came to the conclusion that yes, it's close, and yes, the best man won, and yes. Just tell us already. George yelled, exasperated. Lee smiled evilly, the winner is. And I repeat, the winner is. Yes folks, our new Gryffindor team captain is none other than the one of kind, fabulous, amazing, her. Hermione was on the edge of her seat, Harry Potter. She fell off. Cheers filled the small room as she felt people close in on her before seeing Harry leave his seat to take his place on the shoulders of the crowd. Hermione threw her arms around Ron, the closets to her, and sobbed. And Harry, he never looked happier. Hermione strolled into the Great Hall that evening for dinner, a single thought locked in her mind. Harry, she asked weakly. Huh, oh. Hermione, what's up? He asked. Obviously his latest victory hadn't yet worn off. Harry I was thinking of trying out for the Quidditch team. Ron snorted into his pumpkin juice. Hermione shot him a look of pure venom. Ron had clearly got the message, because he quickly turned around to finish his turkey. You were? Harry asked in surprise. Yes. And I was wondering if you would help me train, that is. Harry smiled and Hermione fought the urge to throw her arms around him. Okay, be on the field at 4:30, sharp. Don't be late. Harry grinned as he scooted over so Hermione could sit down for dinner. Hermione smacked her alarm clock at 4 o'clock the next morning and realized she had only gotten 4 hours of sleep. Though not really. Awake, she began to slip on her jeans and a shirt. Once fully dressed, she headed down to the common room with the broom her parents had bought her for an early birthday present she never thought would come in handy. It was still dark outside and there was no sign of anyone on the field. Hermione bent down to tie her shoelace and decided to wait for Harry when she sat up with a small scream. You're late. It was Harry. He hung in front of her upside down and by the sound of it he had been waiting for her. Sorry, you just scared me, Hermione said, twiddling her Nimbus 2000 in her fingers. Sorry, Harry apologized, dropping from the air and shouldering his firebolt. So you want to learn how to fly? Harry asked as they reached the pitch. I'm impressed, Potter, you catch on quickly, she joked. It's just I never thought I'd see the day when I'd teach you something. Everyone can learn something, it's when they don't think they can that they truly have learned nothing, Hermione said knowingly. Harry grinned. Then, show me how you hold it, he said slyly. Well, Hermione tried hard to remember what it had said in Quidditch through the ages. You do this. She twisted her fingers at an odd angle. Harry began to snigger. No, he said, walking up behind her and swinging one leg over her broom. You hold it, like this. Hermione wasn't listening. She shifted uncomfortably. It was hard to pay attention with Harry's arms wrapped around her as they gently showed her hands how to place themselves. Get it? He asked in her ear. She could feel his breath on her neck and cocked her head ever so slightly. She nodded as Harry stepped off and mounted his own broom. Okay, now kick off, he told her. Hermione bent her knees and kicked hard at the ground. It was rather hard to feel safe on a flying stick, but she did her best to look comfortable. Harry flew over to her, looping wildly in the air. Here comes the real challenge, she said testily, trying to teach me how to play Quidditch. Harry's jaw dropped. No, I mean Hermione, there's no Quidditch is a very complicated game and you don't think I can do it, she said, sticking her nose in the air. You think that just because say it doesn't come out of a book I can't learn it? Well, I can. You just watch, she said surly, dropping a few feet as she ran her fingers through her hair. Quickly stabling the broom with both hands hoping Harry hadn't seen her, she puffed her chest out and rose back to her original height. After an hour of practice, Hermione had decided to try out for Chaser. She was called to the ground by Harry. You did good, he said, shaking his head in an approving sort of way. Hermione fought the urge to say, well, not good, I did well, but thought it sounded rather bossy. Instead she just said, thank you, and changed the subject. They strode across the grounds, laughing and telling jokes. It was when Hermione finished her joke about the blondes on a double-decker bus that she realized they had stopped by the lake and she fell silent. This was where he had almost kissed her. It felt awkward, standing there. Finally Harry broke the silence. Have you heard the one about the Japanese golfer? He asked. Hermione giggled. No, but it sounds funny. It is, Harry said, a glint in his eye that made Hermione feel uneasy. Then she realized he was looking behind her. She twisted around but saw nothing. She turned back to Harry to find that he wasn't there. Harry, she said timidly, backing up to the lake where she turned around to stare at her reflection. Hermione began to think of what Harry had said the last time they had stood there. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sound behind her. Before she had time to turn around, someone had shoved her into the lake. Hermione fell under the icy, cool water and quickly brought herself back up, gasping for breath. She reached the edge of the bank and felt someone lock their arms around her stomach and pulled her back under. They quickly said, and Hermione felt the figure propel itself away from her underwater. Coming up once more, she looked wildly around for the attacker when her eyes fell on Harry. A wide wicked smile spread across his face. Hermione's look of surprise slowly became a disapproving grin. She glided back to the edge, keeping a close eye on him. Hoisting herself onto the bank, she let her feet hang in the water. She was soaking wet. Hermione must have showed her feeling of disgust as the wet clothes clung to her body because Harry began to laugh. "It's not funny," she said grumpily, pulling her shirt away from her stomach and letting air inside, causing a giant air bubble under her shirt. At this Harry laughed harder. "Oh well," Hermione reasoned, flinging herself back into the water, "I'm already wet." Hermione sped off after him, mumbling things like, "I'm going to hurt you," and, "I swear, when I get hold of you." Finally catching up to him near the bank, Harry turned to her. Hermione stopped in front of him. Realizing his chest and shoulders were bare, Harry was breathing deeply from the chase and Hermione watched as his chest fell up and down. She met his eyes and they stared at each other for what seemed eternity. Finally, Hermione the gaze, blushing. "Well, we better just get back up to the castle," she said, staring at the water and grabbing her right arm with her left uncomfortably. Harry, however, didn't say anything. Just took her chin in one hand, placed the other around her back, drawing her closer, and Hermione saw fireworks. He had kissed her. It was all she had dreamed of, like passion into liquid, pouring heavily down her spine. Flinging her arms around his bare neck, she returned the kiss. It only broke when Hermione pulled away, smiling. "A pretty friend, huh?" she asked in an undertone, placing one hand on top of his head and dunking him with a giggle. As 6:30 grew nearer, Harry hoisted himself out of the lake and Hermione immediately became deaf to his offered hand. He could see where years of practice had really paid off. Taking his hand, he pulled her out in turn. Is this love? Hermione found herself daydreaming the 2 days. This had never happened to her before. They had decided, starting next week, Hermione would be taking lessons every other day until tryouts. In between classes she would stare at the lake and couldn't help but smile. She didn't talk to Harry much, but lay in bed late at night thinking about him. What was most interesting about her thoughts about Harry was they were no long, tiring, endless arguments with herself, but thoughts such as, "So this is love." And, "He kissed me." This phrase popped up at odd moments. Like in Transfiguration, Hermione almost became anxious to fall asleep at night, each dream of him sweeter and more clear than the last. That night, however, she had an extremely odd dream. Someone was leading her through a village. Looking up from the ground, she saw it was Harry. She smiled at him and he returned her grin. They entered an old shack. Harry led her to the back of the shed, before leaving. Alone, Hermione looked around. In front of her was a dark wall with pieces of wood chipped out of it in a design. Slowly walking toward it, she stretched out her hand to feel it. In a sudden flash of white light, she was standing in a darkened clearing, surrounded by wood. A bush began to quiver behind her. She spun around as the spark of blinding light brought her back to the abandoned shack. In utter confusion, she felt the design. It was an engraving, an animal of some sort. Then again, she was in the clearing, as Harry stepped out of the bush. With a sigh of relief, she raced to him, but once they touched, she found herself feeling the engraving once more. It was a phoenix. As she touched it, it shot out a brilliant blaze of red and gold, flashing from Harry's face to the engraving, as though under a slide projector on full speed. Shooting bolt up in bed, her breathing fast and shallow, she stared wildly around in confusion. Not knowing what this dream was supposed to mean, Hermione had decided to ignore it. After her kiss from Harry, "He kissed me." She had been wondering if he was still interested in Cho. This continued to nag at her. "Hermione," Harry said, sprinting down the hall to catch up with her. Hermione waited for him to catch his breath and listened. "Practice tomorrow at 4, he panted. She nodded politely and continued down the hall, smiling to herself. She liked practicing with Harry. "Oh, and I needed to ask you something," he said, jogging alongside her once more. "Come on," he said, nodding his head in the direction of an empty classroom to his right. "Yes?" she asked once he had shut and locked the door behind them. "It's this," he said, handing her a chipped piece of stone on a long red ribbon. Examining it more closely in her own hands, Hermione could see the fine design engraved neatly upon it. She could tell it was the head of a phoenix, taking flight, though a third of the rock had been broken off. Flashing back to her dream, she quickly asked, "Where did you get this?" "It was in a package on my bed when I went up to my dorm to get my divination books," Harry explained. "Oh." Hermione still felt rather uncomfortable to be alone with Harry, even with everything racing across her mind at the moment. "Harry," she asked, when I kissed you." Harry finished for her. "Yeah. What was going through your mind?" Hermione noticed they had somehow become very close. Whether Harry had come closer or Hermione had inched in his direction she didn't know. "Why do you ask?" he said slyly but quickly dropped his head in shame. "Hermione, there's something you don't know, but it makes this whole situation very wrong," he informed her, backing up and resting his hand on the door handle. Hermione was confused but stared back down at the broken medallion. "Well, anyway, I'll try and find the other half to this, look it up," she said, trying hard to keep her tone free of all the awkwardness she felt inside as her stomach turned uncomfortably. Hermione tossed her bag down on her four-poster and sank into it, Harry's words echoing in her head as she lay there. What didn't she know? Unzipping her bag she began to lay out her potions work when she stopped at the sight of a ripped piece of parchment in between pages 3 and 4 in her textbook. Unfolding it she read silently. H. Granger. Meet me in the trophy room at 12 o'clock sharp this Tuesday. We have some things to discuss. Tuesday night came rather quickly, faster than Hermione would have liked anyway. She was still pondering whether to should show up or not. Harry had delayed her Quidditch practice for a week, but in return he had moved the tryouts back a week. Hermione looked at the clock. It was now 11:30. Making up her mind she tiptoed down to the common room. To her great relief, it was empty. Now asking herself whether or not she should sneak up to Harry's dorm and grab the invisibility cloak. She answered her question with a faint shake of her head and walk as quietly as possible to the portrait hole. Hoping against hope she wouldn't be caught, Hermione slinked along the hall, keeping to the shadows. Many times she had to stifle a gasp as shadows moved along the passageways. But by pure luck no figures entered her corridor. With the high room in sight, Hermione sprinted the length of the hall, voices echoing behind her. Forcing open the door, her wand clutched tightly in her hand she entered. Before even one quick look around the room, she hurriedly locked the door behind her. With a deep sigh she turned around. To her complete horror a figure stood, bearing down at her. Its pointed face firmly locked in a sneer. Draco Malfoy. "You," she snarled. "Me," he agreed, nodding his head in satisfaction. "I thought you'd come. Thought I was someone else, did you? Maybe Potter." Hermione made to unlock the door but was stopped. Malfoy now had drawn his wand to her throat. "You wouldn't," she choked. "You'd get into much trouble." Malfoy's smile widened. "You'd like to think so, wouldn't you? Bindinium," he hissed, as ropes shot from the ground. And in the blink of an eye, Hermione's arms were bound to her side, her feet locked together as her wand rolled, untouched, across the marbled floor. "We all know what you think of Potter, my question is, must you make it so obvious?" he taunted, twiddling his wand fondly. "Axerio," he shot. Hermione flinched as her wand flew into Malfoy's hand. Feeling quite stupid, for a second he thought he was going to curse her. "But I have something you're both interested in," he said silkily, as the ropes binding Hermione unraveled from around her and vanished. Malfoy had now drawn something from inside his robes. Hermione leaned forward to look in his outstretched palm, but Draco quickly closed his fingers around it. Hermione looked at him questioningly. "I believe you've been looking for it," Malfoy sneered. "What?" Hermione said coolly. "What have I been looking for?" He stretched out his hand once more and it took her a second to realize what it was. It was a broken part of the medallion. It was obviously a wing. Probably the upper wing of the stone phoenix. "Okay Malfoy," she sighed, laying her hands on her hips, "what did you want?" Hermione wished she hadn't asked. In the blink of an eye he had slammed her against the nearest wall, holding her hands high above her head, leaning heavily on her chest. She made to kick him, but he quickly stood on both her feet, immobilizing her. Leaning in close to her ear, he hissed, in a soft yet deep voice, "You." There was a grunt as Draco was knocked sideways and Hermione hit the floor. Getting up she looked frantically around. Draco was struggling with thin air. Harry's head suspended high above him. "Go," Harry ordered, as Malfoy's face took on an odd smashed look. Feeling Hermione couldn't just leave them there, her eyes darted to Draco, who was making frantic moves to get to his wand. The tip of his fingers inched toward it in the struggle against Harry's invisible body. Taking a flying leap, Hermione pulled the wand out of Draco's reach. Scrambling to her feet, she removed her wand from the corner of the room and pointed it at the two. "Harry, move," she said firmly. Harry backed away from her wand point and Draco stood up, his hand held above his head. Walking backwards, she beckoned Harry to come with her, wand still pointed at Draco. Harry threw the cloak over her as she dropped Draco's wand near the door. They both exited. What was that all about? Harry hissed under the cloak. "I'll tell you later," she whispered, turning the corner. "He saved me," she thought happily. Though once she had entered the common room, her thoughts were anything but happy. "What were you thinking?" Harry yelled in awe. "Taking a midnight stroll with dear old Dracky, huh?" Harry was pacing the floor of the common room in front of the fire, glaring down at Hermione on the couch. He had a piece of the medallion. "So," Harry yelled, exasperated, "would you just let me explain?" She hollered, throwing her pillow down on the floor in anger. "You're just being proactive." She struggled to find words. "I am not a child." "Then stop acting like one." Out of all the emotions she had expected Harry to display once they had reached the common room, anger was not one of them. Protective? Of what? "You're lucky you made it back in one piece." Reasoning calmly with herself, Hermione walked slowly up to Harry, and said in much calmer and sweeter voice, "And I have you to thank for it." Sitting solemnly back on the squishy sofa, she watched as Harry took a deep breath and said apologetically, "I'm sorry Hermie, I didn't think." "And I'm sorry too," she whispered. As Harry plopped down next to her, slowly massaging his temples, elbows resting on his knees. Feeling this was the right time, Hermione took a deep breath and asked Ed the question that had been hanging over her head for the last few days. "Harry, what do you think?" But to her relief she was interrupted. "Will you sing for me?" Harry asked, leaning back on the sofa. She giggled. "I can't sing." "No really. Sing for me," Harry urged. "Oh come on, you know I can't sing." "Yes you can. Just go. La 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 la," Harry yelled. It was enough to make Hermione close her ears. "And I thought I was a bad singer." She laughed. "You sing or we dance." "Your choice," he bargained. "I have an idea. How about I just go up to B now? I am so sleepy," she said with a fake yawn. Though she couldn't help suppress the smile spreading across her face. She stood up, but before she could take a step, Harry had grabbed her around the waist and was now holding her hand in dance position, dragging her across the floor. Feeling it was useless to struggle, she let herself be led across the common room. Muttering a melody under his breath, Harry dipped her and stopped near the staircase leading to the girls' dorms. "You're a lovely dancer, darling," he joked, kissing her hand. Staring at each other, Hermione broke the silence with a forced cough. "I'm really tired, I better get up to bed," she reasoned, not making eye contact with him. "You know it's funny. I've seen some gorgeous things, but I could stare at you all day." There was a pregnant pause. "But wouldn't it be nice if I was the only one?" His voice trailed off. "Thank you." Without another word, Hermione walked silently up the stairs. Lying back on her bed, she smiled vaguely. So he loved her. Never had she been told something so romantic, and what did he mean, the only one? Surely he wasn't implying Victor. They had decided it was over. Victor had many other girls hanging around him now that he had graduated. Not that Harry didn't. There were girls around him constantly, but he didn't seem to think about anyone but Cho, well, until now anyway. Once again Hermione was led into the old abandoned shack. Reaching the familiar engraving on the wall, she realized it had caved in around the edges. She stared deep into it and thought the eyes on the stone phoenix had blinked. Stepping cautiously, wanting to run and find Harry, she bumped into something hard. Whipping around, she saw, to her relief, Harry. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she hugged him, only to feel a piece of ribbon pulling on his neck. Tracing the ribbon down, she came to a medallion on the end of a red ribbon. She gaped at it. Harry just smiled, but didn't speak. On it was the phoenix. But the medallion was whole, not broken. Running her fingers over it, she realized there was writing on the back. Squinting to read the small print, she sensed someone behind her. Turning wildly on the spot, she screamed a blinding green flash lit the air along with a high cold scream. The medallion was pulled away from her as Harry fell to the earthy, dirt floor. Flying up in bed, Sweating madly, she tore open her trunk and began to search frantically for the medallion. Finding it in her school bag, she flipped it over and over. Her breath caught in her throat at the sight of the chisels taken out of the rock, one of which Hermione recognized, probably in a different language. It must say something about Harry. She though vaguely. Harry, she screeched, tearing out of the room, as Parvati hit the floor in a tangle of sheets and lavender brown. Looking confused, groggily peeked through her hangings. She continued to shout to the top of her lungs, racing to the boys' staircase. She made to run up it, but someone caught her hard in the stomach. Fighting tooth and nail, she continued to struggle towards the boys' staircase. It was only when the person spoke that she fell quiet. The whole Gryffindor house was now awake, peeking out of their dorms. She knew that voice. Turning slowly around, she stared, wide-eyed at Harry. Lifting her from the ground, he hung her over his arm and marched out of the portrait hole. He shoved open the door to the nearest boys' toilet and set her down on the sink before stepping back to look her in the eye. "What was that all about?" he asked in disbelief. "I had a dream," she answered in a small voice, looking down at the floor. "A dream," he said, nodding vaguely. "A dream, yeah, I have lots of those. But I have yet to have one that sent me on a rampage through the castle." "It was about you," she whispered. "You died." His expression suddenly softened. "And the medallion, you had it around your neck, and it had words on the back. And when I woke up it did. It really did," she explained, trying hard to show him the medallion, still clutched tightly in her hand. But before she could say another word, he had wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. As a tear escaped Hermione's eye, though not even she knew why. "You've just been acting really strange lately." Hermione didn't even have trouble admitting it to herself. Yes, she had been acting weird. But she had her reasons. Grabbing his shoulders, she hugged him back. "So what do you say? We going to try and get that chip of medallion or what?" she asked, pulling away from Malfoy. Harry said, looking at her as though she had lost it. "Well, yeah." Harry shook his head, smiling. "What did you have in mind?" The following morning, Hermione spent most of her Quidditch practice with Ron and Harry, discussing ways of stealing, though it wasn't really stealing if you were taking it from a git like Malfoy. Ron added, the chip of medallion away from Malfoy. "Well, we could just stun him and take it," Ron suggested, catching the ball Harry had thrown for him. "Malfoy wouldn't let any of us within 10 feet of him with a wand," Harry reminded him. "Well, he'd probably let me," Hermione mumbled under her breath bitterly. Ron stopped and stared at her, letting a ball hit on the top of his head. An insane smile spread across his face. "What?" Harry asked, watching Ron. Then, catching sight of Hermione, he too grinned. Hermione shook her head in denial. "No," she said firmly, crossing her arms in front of her and managing to stay on her broom at the same time. "No, I will not." They didn't seem to be listening. "Guineas," Ron muttered, floating slowly closer. Harry nodded. "You'll do just fine," he agreed. Harry and Ron spent the next 3 days begging Hermione to help them. "I'll help, but I'm not going within 10 miles of Malfoy," she repeated stubbornly for the 50th time that day. "Come on, Hermie, we need you," Ron moaned desperately. Hermione looked pitifully around at their grief-stricken faces, thinking merrily of what Harry may say if she went along with them. Sighing heavily, she smiled. "Okay, what do I have to do?" It was carefully planned. Ari and Hermione would follow her a Slytherin to the common room tomorrow night. Listen for the password. Harry had slipped a knot inside Draco's bag saying it was from his secret admirer, and to be in the Slytherin common room at 2 o'clock in the morning. Hermione would go in to find Draco waiting for her. "It all really just flows from there," Ron said confidently. "Easy for you to say, Hermio." Nay moaned over the top of her 1,000-paged arithmancy book. Hermione didn't feel comfortable with what she was about to do. So many things could go wrong. And she would be breaking so many school rules. Harry and Ron seemed okay with the fact that they would be the last anyone would suspect to be involved if Hermione was caught. "Don't worry, if you get caught, well, tell them it was our fault," Harry assured her, covering the two of them with the invisibility cloak. However, Hermione's comfort hadn't changed. They found 2 Slytherin girls, Pansy Parkinson and Emily Gordon, to follow down to the dungeon. Hermione couldn't believe what they were conversing about. Not just about boys, but about things married people do. Bloody beast, she giggled, stepping into the dungeon room hidden behind the stone wall. Hermione's stomach churned at the sight of Draco, sitting in the far corner of the common room before the wall closed on them. Hermione quickly took out a piece of parchment, scribbled down the password, and stuffed it back in her pocket. She knew she wouldn't forget it, but took it as an extra precaution. They headed back to the Gryffindor Tower to wait for the next 5 hours. The clock shone 1:30 next to Hermione's four-poster. She stepped out of bed, she had never changed out of her robes, and descended the stairs to the common room. Harry was sitting on a chair in front of the fire. The invisibility cloak draped across his lap, clearly deep in thought. She tapped him on the shoulder and he jumped. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. Hermione shook her head. No. Harry had decided to escort her to the dungeons where he would wait outside for her, only coming in on her signal. "If I scream you'll be sure to come and bet me, right?" Hermione whispered outside the entrance to the Slytherin common room. "Of course," Harry breathed. And to Hermione's great surprise, he pecked on the cheek. Slightly flustered, Hermione entered the eerie dungeon room. Without taking time to examine it, her eyes fell on a silver speck, poking out over the top of a chair with its back turned to her. The sound of her feet must have startled him, because at that instant, the chair swung around. The look on his face went from confusion to a sheer evil grin. Taking a deep breath, Hermione repeated to herself what Harry had told her earlier, "Remember, you're in control." She forced her face into what she hoped was a bad girl sort of grin. She thought she saw a mixture of confusion and fear pass over his cold gray eyes. Taking one more deep breath and telling herself she was doing it for Harry, she glided over to the nearest couch, nearly tripping on her shoelace but never taking her eyes off Malfoy. Dropping down on the couch and laying on her side, she saw Malfoy's eyes gleam. Though it made her uneasy, she continued to smirk. "How did you get in?" he asked. "I have my sources," she whispered mysteriously, wanting to spit at the look of deep interest Malfoy bestowed on her but kept smiling. "Then why are you here?" he asked, standing and moving forward to sit on the arm of the velvety green sofa. Scooting as far as she could away from Ma. LFOY, but trying to still look comfortable, she answered, "I thought you knew." Scooting ever so closer to her, Hermione had to lean over the edge of the couch in fear of falling off, yet if she leaned forward, or sat straight up for that matter, she would have only been inches away from Malfoy's face. "What if doesn't anyone come down here at this time of night?" she asked desperately. "No, it's just you and me." Hermione tried her hardest to look pleased as he began to stroke her arm. Looking down, she realized with a jolt of relief that the chip of the medallion was hanging out of his pocket. "Remember, you're in charge." Harry's words echoed in her head. A true smile crossed her face for the first time since she had entered the dark and gloomy room. She sat up with a plan fully formed in her mind. Placing one hand on his chest, she began, "I never thought I'd meet someone like you, Draco." Exaggerating the pronunciation of his first name, she felt his hand side off her arm and he stared questioningly at her. She had to fight down a laugh. The only time she had ever seen him lose his smirk to be replaced with a look of, well, fear was when he had been told his detention was to help Hagrid find dead unicorns in the Forbidden Forest. Someone so masculine and brave. She felt him scoot in the other direction with a hard swallow. She gave a low laugh, as though to sound sexy, as Ron had explained it. Wrapping one leg over his, she leaned closer and rested her head on his shoulder, playing with his blonde hair. She was quite enjoying herself. Maybe she should taunt Draco every day. "Someone so sexy," she said dramatically, trying desperately not to laugh, yet not gag at the fact she had told Draco Malfoy he was sexy. Never had she seen Malfoy so uncomfortable, she thought, scooting closer to him. He had now made his way to the other end of the couch. Draco was now leaning back over the armrest as she had done. Hermione leaned over him, slipping her hand into his pocket, withdrawing the stone and placing it in her own pocket. I thought you liked Potter." His voice was higher than usual. She let out an insane laugh and slid back onto the cushion on the sofa. "Look at the time," she said slyly, checking her watch, "but don't you worry, I'll be back soon," she told Malfoy, laying a finger on his chest and watching him slightly recoil. "Would you mind waiting a second?" he asked. getting unsteadily to his feet and heading up the stairs to their right. Bending down and tying her shoe, Hermione decided she wouldn't wait for Malfoy to return, just leave right then. Standing up, she heard a faint grunt and spun wildly around. But no one was there. Striding happily over to the wall, she left the dungeon. Searching her surroundings, she looked for a sign of Harry when someone pulled her around the waist and pressed her roughly against them. Looking down, she saw nothing but the stone floor and realized she must be under the invisibility cloak. She whispered to Harry, who didn't say anything, but headed off to the steps they had come down earlier. He was rather clumsy and stepped on her toes as he took wrong turns now and then. "Are you all right?" she asked, stepping through the portrait hole. Again, he didn't answer. Heading over to the fire, she began to explain what had happened to Harry, who hadn't taken off the cloak, and adding more wood to the burning ashes. "You should have seen his face, it was priceless," she told him, turning around and with a jolt saw, not Harry standing there, but Malfoy, his wand pointed directly at her, wearing a triumphant sneer. "How many times must I flush before you go away?" she asked tirelessly, resting her hands on her hips. "Cleaver Granger," he smirked, "now, give me back what is rightfully mine." "You didn't say please. Don't play games with me, Granger," he warned, stretching out his other hand for the stone which Hermione did not give him. His other hand was still pointing a wand at her. A sudden movement came from behind him. Hermione nearly said something when she realized it was Ron. He too had his wand and was pointing it at Draco's back, who didn't seem to realize there was another person in the room with them. "I'll give it to you if you answer my questions truthfully," she bargained, trying hard not to look at Ron so that Draco wouldn't catch her gaze. "Granger." Hermione watched Ron through the corner of her eye, moving closer and closer. Ron raised his wand to curse him, but Hermione gave him a look that clearly said, no. Ron got the message, but didn't stop moving forward. "Where did you get it?" she asked. "Get what? Don't play dumb with me," Hermione warned. Malfoy snorted. "I do believe I'm in charge at the moment. I'm the one with the wand. Where did you get it?" Ron shot. Malfoy must jumped 6 feet in the air, now pointing his wand at Ron. Hermione wasted no time. "Expelliarmus," she hollered. Malfoy's wand flew into the air and Ron, grinning broadly at Hermione, caught it. Malfoy stared from one to the other. "Where's Harry?" Hermione demanded. "I'm right here." This time it was Ron and Hermione's turn to jump. Harry was strolling down the boys' staircase. "Harry," Hermione gasped. "How did you get up there?" He shot Malfoy a sour look and began, "This git stunned me and dragged me down the hall where I woke up. But I still had the map and made it back without getting caught." "Map?" shootoop Malfoy. "How did you know Harry was there?" Hermione asked Draco. He snorted again. "You think I'm stupid?" The room went silent. Ron gave a look that clearly said, "Yes. I know you wouldn't come alone, Granger. I knew Potty had to be waiting outside for you. When you leaned over to tie your shoe, I snuck out the door and cursed everything in sight." Harry gritted his teeth as he said this. "Fooled all of you. And they call you smart." Malfoy sneered, glaring at Hermione. "Shut up," Ron said hotly. "Get him out of here, I can't stand to look at him any longer." Hermione plopped down onto the couch and stood up quickly as Harry and Ron began to drag Draco out the portrait hole. "Wait, what if he remembers how to get back?" she asked quickly. Harry furrowed his brow and Ron shrugged. "I say we slit him open and feed his liver to Crookshanks," Ron reasoned, smiling evilly at Draco. "No, that poor cat would be sick for weeks, har." Rai gave Draco a grin that undoubtedly asked, "What do you think?" Draco, however, was not pleased. "This is stupid. Just let me go, like I want to spend time in this filthy tower." He jerked free of ire arms as Ron shoved Draco's wand in one hand. With another sideways glare at Hermione, Malfoy left. "He'll be back," Ron sighed. The following day in Transfiguration, some interesting news was presented. There will be a ball. Professor McGonagall informed them sternly, a Halloween ball. Professor Dumbledore is thinking of throwing a Christmas ball, depending on how well your behave is at this one. After her words, whispers encircled the room and Hermione shot a sideways glance at Harry. Boy, she wanted to ask him, but he was already thinking about someone else. Someone with black hair, and brown eyes. And Hermione would have bet her grades that she was a 6th year. "Who are you asking?" Ron whispered to the both of them from Harry's other side. Neither answered. I've got to ask him, she told herself, pacing the floor of her dorm. This is my last chance. Okay, just say it, Harry. I was just wondering. No, I need something not dumb, quite frankly. Hermione. Ron called up the stairs of the common room. We have defense against the dark arts in 5 minuets. Flying down the stairs, Hermione began to drag the two boys out of the common room down the hall. Who are you asking? Harry said, grabbing Hermione around the waist and stopping her from running down the hall. I'm not going. She said this so sternly that neither of them dared press the subject. Their new defense against the dark arts teacher was a teacher. She had long black hair and blue eyes. She looked rather bony, with high cheekbones and an American accent. She was always over-exited, and believed in hands-on activities. Though she wasn't as soft-spoken as Lupin, she was quite the teacher. From what she had told them, she came from a wizarding school called Lexington's and her name was Professor Helen. Now, today we will be on Chapter 4, entitled, Spells. Though there are some spells outlawed by the Ministry which I know you all have been informed of, there are some spells many people are working toward banning. Can anyone tell me one of them? One was in the Daily Prophet last Wednesday. Scanning the newspaper article in her mind, Hermione flung her hand in the air. She knew. It was the Devertus Curse. But to her disappointment, many other people raised their hands. And since it was on rare occasions that someone besides Hermione answered every question in all her classes, she figured she would be the last one called on. Hermione sat late, finishing up her essay when someone nearby cleared their throat loudly. Looking up from her book, she saw it was Ron. Hey, she said brightly. She had aced another quiz and her victory hadn't worn off just yet. I just wanted to ask. Ron seemed tense and kept staring around the room as though praying for someone to rescue him. Yes, Hermione. Will you go to the ball with me? It took Hermione a moment to realize the fact that Ron had said something. Then it took her a moment to endure what he had said. She realized her mouth was hanging open and quickly closed it. Ron blushed scarlet. Yes, I mean no, I mean. She glanced from Harry to Ron. Yes, I'd love to. Ron grinned from ear to ear. Hermione forced a smile. For what seemed like 5 minuets they just stared at each other. Who's Harry going with? Hermione whispered to Ron over breakfast the following morning. I mean, he seems awfully cheerful. He's cheerful because Cho Chang said yes. Ron explained. Cho Chang? Hermione asked, pretending to be puzzled but picturing herself with her hands clasped firmly around Ms. Karate's neck. Ron pointed. Her, you know, the Ravenclaw seeker. Oh, her. Hermione smiled, though not at Ron, who obviously, though she was, at the vision of Cho falling off a broom. Hermione hopped out of bed and threw on her robes before dashing downstairs for her weekly Quidditch practice. Tryouts were in 2 weeks and Hermione felt she wasn't ready. You'll do fine, Harry assured her as she stopped him from scoring. Yeah, Ron agreed while Hermione slipped the quaffle past him and tossed it through the middle hoop. I'll be surprised if you don't make it. Ron had taken to practicing with them and the three could be found every weekend morning and weekday night, without fail, streaking across the Quidditch field. Hermione, Harry said suddenly, any luck with that rock? You mean the medallion? She asked. No, not at all. The medallion had completely slipped her mind in light of the recent events. I love this broom, Ron muttered dreamily for the 1000th time that morning. Hermione rolled her eyes. Ron had received a brand new Nimbus 2000. Not to mention sleek new deep purple dress robes. She streaked off to defend her goal from Harry. It was with flying colors that Hermione made the house team. She had been nervous at first, but she reminded herself that she had flown around the Quidditch pitch a million times before and loosened up. But Hermione believed that what had truly brought her was the look of confidence on Harry's face as she mounted her broom. Not only had she made chaser, but Ron had now replaced Oliver Wood as keeper and could be seen walking along the corridors, a huge smile plastered on his face. August slowly became September and October brought the smell of pumpkins and snow to the castle. The ball was soon to take place. Hermione was getting sick of questions like, what are you wearing? And, did you hear who Neville's going with? Even through all the chaos, Hermione found herself lying wide awake at night, her mind lingering on one thought, Harry. The ball was in 2 days, she told herself. getting to her feet and closing her hangings around her bed after her. It was her last chance to tell Harry how she felt, and she had blown it. She stared out her window at the starry night sky. Now Harry would fall madly in love with Cho, and it would all end like a fairy tale, for Harry at least. But if that's what it would take to make Harry happy, then that's what she wanted, for Harry to be happy. Making up her mind, she walked over to her trunk and pulled out parchment, a quill, and a bottle of ink. She would write Harry a letter and leave it under his napkin when he left his seat at the ball. Dipping her quill in the bottle, she began. Harry, I feel this is something I need to tell you. And I will feel so much better when it's all out. I love you, Harry Potter, and always will. She hesitated, her quill suspended over the parchment. Should she sign it? No, not if he opened it at the table and Cho saw it. Folding the note up, she slipped it into her arithmetic book and lay back down. Hermione sat the following morning in the locker rooms listening to Harry's usual morning speech on what made their team great. And when you work together like that, are you listening? He paused. Hermione was listening, though she was the only one. As he said this, Fred jerked awake as he was elbowed painfully in the ribs by George, causing him to let out a huge snort. Angelina Johnson turned her attention away from her fingers, which were covered with bubble gum because she had been playing with it, and Ron looked up from his broom, which he had been polishing for the last hour or so. What are you wearing to the ball? Katie asked Hermione, not understanding why her fingers began to flex and her jaw clenched suddenly. Hermione spent 6 hours getting ready the next day. She had only seen 2 other girls dress robes and was eager to know what everyone thought of her garments. Twirling once more in front of the huge mirror, Hermione felt satisfied. She was wearing robes of flowing material in a pastel lime green. Her hair was in a full bun and 2 curled strands of hair hung on either side of her face. She swept over to her pillow and slid the note out from under it. She began to squish tape on the back. Lifting her sleeve, she placed the note on her upper arm. Slowly descending the steps, she saw Harry and Ron waiting at the bottom, conversing. Ron stopped in mid-sentence at the sight of her and allowed his jaw to hit the floor. Harry swore under his breath and continued to stare, wide-eyed. Wow, Ron muttered vaguely as she reached them. You look wonderful, Harry said. Merrily transfixed. Ron led Hermione out of the common room, arm in arm, Harry striding along beside them. Only Ron noticed how as they passed that every boy stopped to goggle at Hermione. Hermione, on the other hand, was thinking about how handsome Harry looked. His robe matched his eyes, making them glow. Stepping into the corridor outside, Hermione scowled. Cho Chang, her face alight with happiness, was fighting towards them through sea of swarming students. Cho, Harry said with relief, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, she smiled, taking Harry's arm. Hermione grimaced. Oh, said Harry, turning to look at his 2 best friends and acting as though he'd never seen anything quite like them before. This is Ron. How do you do? Ron said politely, shaking her hand. And Hermione. The 2 boys stared uncertainly at her, probably because of the stiff was in which she ate. Hello. They began to herd toward the doors, Hermione thinking bitterly of how she wished Cho would say something to insult her. Hermione wasn't keen on looking like the bad guy and felt if she broke the ice and said something rude, when a fight broke out, the fingers would be pointed at her. Her glance lingered on Harry. Not for long, however, she found his open mouth and the transfixed way he was staring at Cho most revolting. The hall was decked with shadows from the candles hovering above 100 or so small circular tables. It cast a romantic glow, helped along by the soft melodies of a piano from the far corner of the hall. Hermione felt her stomach give an engrossed squirm as Cho let out a giggle of excitement to her right. Hermione cocked her head back to stare at the enchanted ceiling. The sky looked crisp and new, a sense of forbidding hung in the air, as though it knew something they didn't. The clouds half covered the moon and the stars danced across the sky, clearly visible from the lack of bright light in the hall. Ron shifted uncomfortably next to her. Quickly snapping out of her trance, Hermione looked at him. Would you Ron stuttered. Hermione looked sideways at Harry and Cho gliding across the floor, arms around each other. I thought you'd never ask, she said swiftly, dragging Ron out to the dance floor in a quick step and restlessly watching Harry and Cho. Hermione knew Cho wouldn't do anything harmful, but Hermione felt that serial killers often looked kind and decent also. She wasn't going to let them out of her sight. If Cho kissed Harry, then Hermione wouldn't have a chance. Knocking into people, Hermione tried desperately not to lose them and look natural, as though she was enjoying herself at the same time. Ron looked utterly bewildered as she led him in the weirdest step of the century. Catching his eye, she said quickly, "It's called the chase." "Yeah, the chase." Ron nodded faintly, his look clearly told her he thought she had lost it. However, Hermione didn't care at the moment what Ron, or anyone else for that matter, thought of her peculiar behavior. To her and Ron's relief, Harry and Cho finally took a table in the back. Hermione forced Ron into a chair on the other side of the hall and focused on Harry. Once he got up, that's all she wanted. Hermione half wished she wouldn't have the chance to slip the note under his napkin, and half did. Hermione watched Harry leave the table and Cho before heading to the punch bowl. "Ron," Hermione said suddenly, "would you run and get us some punch?" Ron shrugged and disappeared into the crowd. Her heart thumping hard against her ribs, Hermione stood up, took a deep breath, and began to stride to where Cho sat, staring the wall to her left. Reaching her, Hermione cleared her throat loudly. Cho jerked back to reality and her face broke into a smile. "Hermione," she said sweetly, "where's Ron?" "Oh, he went to go get some punch," she said quickly. "Would you like to sit down?" Hermione sat purposely down in Harry's vacant seat. There was an uneasy silence. "So, Harry talks about you a lot," Cho said, giving Hermione a kind smile, Hermione desperately holding back the urge to spit. Sure, she liked what Cho had said but was rather reluctant to return her smile. Cho began to fiddle with her fingernails, which gave Hermione the opportunity to slip her note out from under her watch. "He talks about like he's known you his whole life," Cho finished. And Hermione swore she had heard a pinch of bitterness, or jealousy in her voice. You really like him, don't you?" Hermione said with difficulty. Cho sighed. "I miss Cedric," she said solemnly. And a tear ran down her cheek. A surge of guilt hit Hermione hard in the chest. All she felt were bad wishes toward Cho. And now, she realized her life had had its fill of devastation. "I'm sorry," Hermione whispered, earning another teary smile from Cho. "Well," she said quickly, whipping the tears off her face, "no use crying about it." Hermione began but stopped. Harry was heading back towards the table. Quickly slipping the note under Harry's napkin so that it was just visible, Hermione stood up. Giving Cho her first and true smile, she said, "Have a good time, okay? I'll see you later." Cho nodded. Hermione left the table quickly as possible. She met Ron halfway to the table and grinned, pulling the 2 glasses of punch out of Ron's hands and set them down at the nearest table. Draw. GGing him out to the dance floor, they began to dance. Hermione felt she need not worry about Cho. Someone who had lost someone so close to them and still be so sweet was not going to move so quickly as to kiss anyone on their first date. She was so nice, and so accepting. With a new respect for Cho, Hermione allowed her worries to take flight and enjoy the melody. Hermione felt her feet begin to ache. He an hour later and beckoned Ron to sit with her for a while. They found a table near Harry and Cho's table only to realize they were out on the dance floor. Hermione rested her arm on the table to pick up her drink and heard a crumpling noise from under her wrist. Lifting her arm quickly, her face fell. Harry hadn't gotten his letter. There, sticking out from under the corner of her napkin, was a piece of folded parchment. She looked quickly at Ron. "Wasn't Harry sitting over there?" she asked, pointing to the table next to them. Ron shrugged. "No," she told herself, "he just didn't find the letter." With a heavy heat, Hermione made her way up to the girls' dorms that night, the note still clutched tight in her hand. Slipping into bed, she stared longingly at the note, a green glow cast through the paper. She laid back, miserable. Then, her eyes wide, sat up again. Green glow. Green glow. Her ink wasn't green. Quickly unfolding the letter in green ink, she saw an untidy scroll which she felt she knew and read. Though she felt rather relieved knowing it was for her, her desire to know who it was from grew stronger. Hermione hadn't touched the medallion for weeks now, and felt rather guilty. She kept a close eye on Harry, hoping against hope the note was from him. When she really thought about it, he seemed the only one capable, and in the right position to write it. There was one thing that seemed able to take her mind off Harry and the note, and that was Quidditch. It turned out better than she thought, and was actually quite fun. Hermione was proud of herself for making the tea. But her pride was nothing compared to Ron's. He pranced around the school, waving and chatting with people Hermione seriously doubted he knew. Judging by the look of confusion on his victims' faces, they didn't know him either. Hermione was looking forward to her first Quidditch match, played against Slytherin. Though she didn't understand the points all that well, as Harry had said, the important part is being able to understand the game, which Hermione did. Waking early on Saturday, Hermione grabbed her broom for practice. The match was tomorrow and Hermione had the feeling Harry was going to work them harder than ever. She met the rest of the team in the locker rooms. "Our first match," Harry began bravely, folding his arms behind his back and staring around at them all, nodding approvingly. "Our first chance to prove to this school that this year, we cannot be beat." He slammed his fist into his right palm determinedly. "Are you going to be ready, when it comes? Are you going to win?" "Yes," they all answered, though not in a confident way, more in a shut up and get to the point sort of way. "Then show me." Later that morning, Hermione sat with Harry and Ron in the Great Hall eating breakfast. Quidditch practice had truly worn them out. Hermione was getting tired of hearing, "Are you going to be ready?" every time Harry looked at her. Hermione left for the library to catch up on history and also in hope of finding more clues about Harry's medallion. She began to flip through symbols and their meanings when her eyes fell on a torn page. What Hermione found most peculiar about it was not that it was ripped, but what part of the page was ripped. The page was entitled, "The Phoenix." It showed the magnificent bird on many different ornaments, rugs, rings, platters and even on a toilet lid. A part was torn from the bottom right-hand corner. She began to inscription that had also been torn in half. "The medallion alone is one." And it stopped. Following the next line she read, "However, this means if fallen int." Desperate, excitement coursing through her, Hermione continued to read but came to the conclusion that nothing left would help her. She flipped the page over hopelessly. The other side was devoted interlay to the meaning of the four houses and their descendants. She decided to check the book out and try her hardest to uncover the mystery later. Pulling her history of magic book out of her bag, she thought she might as well catch up on some reading about the Great Wizard War of 1563 when a piece of parchment caught her attention. Sliding it out from between pages 4 and 5, she looked around. No one was watching, so she began to read. "In short I'll say, I love you. In long I'll say, I grieve for you. In truth I'll say, I love you, Hermione Granger. And always will." But, once again, it wasn't signed. Folding it up, she decided to finish her homework in her dorm. She was running, as fast as she could down an earthy path, surrounded by pitch-black wood. Her bare feet hit the earth beneath her with such agony from the blisters forming on her heels. Mist hung in the air, clouding her vision. Galloping steps echoed behind her from the depth of the trees behind, and she picked up speed. It became harder and harder to breathe. A small shack, rusty and broken, loomed nearer, cutting a definite outline in the fog. As it became clearer, she felt her foot hit a shrub in the ground. Stumbling forward, her face hit soft, brown earth. It was going to get her now. She had fallen, she was down. Any second now it was going to burst from the trees. Looking hopelessly up at the shack, she saw, with immense relief, a light that hadn't been there before, piercing the silence more effectively than if she had screamed. There was a warmness to the light, like a ray of hope, assuring her that she could make it, not to give up without a fight. She lifted herself determinedly to her feet and darted for the door, the agonizing pain in her foot seemed to heal instantaneously as her feet hit the damp, wooden floors of the shack. She stepped inside, transfixed. Then she heard it again. Something or someone was galloping, like a steed. Ipping around, she drew a tight breath in her chest. It seemed to sting from the cold night air penetrating her lungs. Determined not to scream, she backed up against the far wall, opposite the door. Suddenly, it ceased. Was getting ready to attack. To pounce. The sound of crunching leaves met her ears. It was in a trot, heading for her. She looked wildly around the shack, anything for her to defend herself with. But the cabin seemed bare except for a flight of rickety old stairs to her right, which from their appearance would crumble if so much as a feather found its way to the steps, and if that was true, They were certainly unable to hold her weight. Feeling it was her last hope, she darted to the stairs and held firmly to the stairs. Miraculously, the steps did nothing but squeak. She had reached a landing and froze when she heard shuffling footsteps below. Turning a corner, she found herself in a hall lined with doors. But almost immediately, her attention was captured by the door at the very end of the hall. She had found it, the light-filled room. Tiptoeing, she slowly made her way down the hall. She froze once again. The bottom step had creaked. She began to walk a little faster. When more shuffles followed, her pace became more rapid. Hearing a sudden crack, she broke into a run. Without hesitation, she flung the door open. Squinting, she noticed a figure, standing in the center of the room. Its back was to her, staring out the window, its hands tucked snugly in its pockets. The light began to dim as she cautiously approached the unfamiliar outline. She lifted her hand to tap the body on the shoulder when she felt her heart stop. She spun around to see the door had closed with a snap. Feeling quite foolish, she turned around only to jerk again. The figure had turned. Why hadn't she recognized him? Letting out a sigh of relief, she began, "Oh my God, Harry. You scared me. Listen, we have to get out of here. There's a thing, it's downstairs." Her panic had returned and she was once again confused. But Harry didn't move, just stared at her. "Harry, are you all right?" "Hello," she said, slowly down a tad. Harry remained unfazed. He stared blankly ahead, his face motionless and free of any sign of a smile. She cupped his face in her hands, beginning to truly panic. "Harry, Harry," she said frantically. His neck turned ever so slightly to face her. An odd smile broke out on his face. A smile she had never seen before. It didn't belong to him. He began to laugh. A high cold laugh, making the hair on her spine stand on end, sending a chill that seemed reached her very soul. Backing up, she watched in horror as his face pointed and his hair lengthened into silvery locks. And his eyes had somehow changed from green to a cold grayish silver, empty and harsh. Her jaw dropped as she realized she was staring straight into the eyes of Draco Malfoy, laughing insanely. Stumbling backwards, her mouth open in a silent scream, she hit an unidentifiable substance, heavy, yet limp. Turning on she realized she had tripped over the body of a wizard in old dark blue robes, sprawled in a corner, forgotten. He had a long white beard that reached his navel and brown, half-open eyes. A blood-stained knife lay, rusted and brown, next to him. He was dead. She wanted to scream in hope of rescue, but she seemed to have left her voice back in the wood. Boom! The door was suddenly knocked clean off its hinges as horrific scream rang like a bell, drowning Malfoy's hysterics. In a sudden flash of green light she fell. Hermione hit her dorm floor in a tangle of sheets, screaming to the top of her lungs. "Hermione! Hermione! What happened? You okay?" No, I'm not. I mean," she began to take deep breaths as Parvati and Lavender pulled her calmly to her feet. "I had a dream." A dream," Parvati repeated, nodding fervently. No, not a dream, a nightmare. A night. Hermione struggled to find words to describe what she had seen. "And Harry I mean Malfoy was," she gasped, blinking furiously, in utter shock. Do you want us to go get Harry?" Lavender asked anxiously. "Yes," Hermione said louder than she had intended to. "Yes. Go get Harry, oh my God, go get Harry." The scenes began to flash in front of her. Did all this have a meaning? It couldn't possibly. She stumbled back onto her bed as Parvati left the room with a snap of the door. The world seemed to be swerving in and out in focus, her head was spinning. She grabbed firmly to her bed in order to stabilize herself. Lavender's face was a huge blur in front of her, moving closer. Hermione couldn't tell she was nervous until she spoke. "Hermione," she whispered, "are you okay?" Hermione didn't answer, she couldn't. She began to slowly drift, her consciousness ebbing away. Almost as though she had began to size up, her body seemed to go numb and she became limp, falling back onto her four-poster. It was hours later when Hermione woke in the hospital wing. She let out a small moan and suddenly saw blurred shapes moving around her, followed by hushed, anxious voices. "She's waking up. Where's Madame Pomfrey? Hurry and get me another ice pack." She squinted ever so slightly when she was finally able to make out the mixture of black and peach. Harry was leaning over her, grinning. With a sudden gasp she sat up quickly. Harry. Oh my god. He was there and boom. She said frantically, tugging on his shirt. It's okay shush it's okay, okay, he said soothingly, placing a finger to her lips calmly and crouching near her bed. Taking a deep breath she slumped back on her pillow. Ron appeared at her feet and the three stood in silence for a moment. Boom. Harry said finally, making her laugh. No it was. I'll make you a deal. You get some rest and then you can tell me all about it later. Okay. Hermione nodded faintly. And Hermione, Harry said, the Quidditch match. The Quidditch match. Hermione shrieked. We asked Professor Dumbledore. It's delayed. Hermione let out a slow, deep breath. Harry and Ron exchanged glances before exiting the curtain that surrounded her bed. And once again, she muttered. Making sure Harry and Ron were out of earshot, I find myself in the position to say, boy, do I love him. Oh boy, Harry sighed, running his fingers worriedly through his hair as Ron sat, gawking at Hermione when she had finished her story. And then, I just kinda fell. She said simply, trying hard to catch Harry's eye, wanting to know his reaction. And I've had others, one about the medallion and, she stopped. Without another word she shot up the girl's staircase and pulled, symbols and their meanings out of her trunk. Thrusting the book into Harry's hands she said excitedly, turn. End to page, she stared at her wrist where she had hurriedly written down the page number, 763. She watched in amusement as Harry's eyes followed the page and his jaw dropped. What? Ron asked, looking at the two of them and then back at the page. Honestly, Hermione snapped, you can be so. And look. It says here that the symbol itself was used as a sign for greatness. Harry said. Of course it was. Hermione said, exasperated, don't you guys ever listen? No, Ron said simply. Depends, Harry shrugged. Ron groaned, glancing at his watch, detention. He said flatly, leaving Harry and Hermione alone. What did he get detention for? Hermione wondered aloud. Oh, Filch caught him using magic in the corridors while you were in the hospital wing. Harry answered, not looking up from the page. Hermione, Harry said suddenly, you've been acting weird lately. What do you mean? She said nervously. Well if it had anything to do with that you know. Kiss, she finished for him. Yeah, I mean if it did. You know what Harry? I am really tired, I think I'll go up to bed now. Okay. And she walked as fast as she could to the girls' staircase without a backward glance. Later that night Hermione finally lied down after convincing Parvati and Lavender that she was fine. This took a lot of effort. So, he thinks about it too, she thought, not knowing whether to be happy or worried. There was a sudden knock on the door, making Lavender snort. Hermione peeked through her curtains as the door creaked open. Hermione. She didn't answer. She couldn't tell who it was. Their voice was barely more than a whisper. Hermione. They said again. This time a little louder, loud enough for Hermione to recognize who it was. She quickly pretended to be asleep and turned on her side as the floor began to creak as he made his way to her bed. She heard him shuffling through sheets as he peeked in through Lavender's hangings. Hermione nearly snorted under her breath as there was a thud and loud hiss followed by an angry voice, stupid cat. Hermione where are you? It stopped as she felt her hanging brush her arm. Knowing he must be looking right at her she heard him draw a slow breath. And he's there, she told herself, for me. She felt his hand graze her cheek, whipping a few loose hairs out of her face which had been her only source of protection. If it weren't for those loose hairs, he would have realized she was smiling. However he didn't seem to notice. She heard him turn and the creaks fade in the direction of the door when. Crash. He heard him hit the floor and flung her hangings back. Hermione looked wildly around but saw nothing. Afraid to switch on the lamp, thinking it would wake Parvati and Lavender she crept silently across the floor. Ow! Her foot hit uneven ground, bringing her to the floor. Hermione froze. The floor was perfectly normal, and Crookshanks was nowhere in sight. Softer creaks met her ears and she understood. Jumping up she ran to the door, spreading her arms in front of it like a bird in mid-flight. I know you're in here, she paused, Agent X, and finished in mock danger. There was a muffled laugh to her right. Aha! She exclaimed, jumping from in front of the door and holding her fingers before her like a gun, in total police stance. She narrowed her eyes, unable to hide the grin on her face. The creaking footsteps replaced the silence and she followed them with her hands when she realized he was circling her. When suddenly, they ceased. She waited in silence. In one large leap he knocked her to the ground before sitting on her, and then, he did something Hermione had hated since she was young: he tickled her. Laughing hysterically, she tried desperately to wiggle free. Trying to explain why he had to stop through struggled breath. You're gonna wake them up," she gasped, trying to shield her ribs with her arms, squinting up at the ceiling. Finally, letting his hands rest on her stomach, he stopped. "You know," she said breathlessly, "you do have the advantage." Harry pulled down the hood of his cloak to smile at her. Harry, could you get off?" "Oh, right." Harry stood up, still grinning broadly at her. He offered her a hand, which she took. "Agent X," he said, snorted, pulling her to her feet. "So, what are you doing up here? You know better than to be in the girls' dormitories. Besides, Harry, it's a school night, you need sleep," Hermione said, mainly wanting to change the subject. "Hermione, go for a walk with me." "Harry, it's a school night. So, yeah, so, no, that's so," Hermione said as though this settled the matter, crossing her arms and looking away from him, shaking her head disapprovingly. Harry's smile broadened. "Fine, that's okay. I'll go get some sleep now." There was something in the way he gave up so easily that made Hermione suspicious. No to mention his eyes, they were brighter than usual. She watched him slip the invisibility cloak on. The door opened, then shut. "Why'd you turn him down?" someone asked, making Hermione jump. She spun around to find Parvati peeking through her hanging, looking rather disappointed. "It's a school night," Hermione snapped. Rolling her eyes, Parvati disappeared behind her hangings. The door clicked open. "Please." Harry whined miserably. "Just go," Parvati hissed. Feeling quite defeated, Hermione slipped on her bathrobe and joined Harry on the landing. "So, what do you want to talk about?" Harry asked minuets later while the two strode along the banks of the lake. "You brought me out here when I didn't even want to go, and you don't even know what you want to talk about," Hermione said disbelievingly. Harry gave her a guilty smile. "Fine, I'll pick the subject." Harry, did you send any?" Harry let out a loud cough. Hermione sensed it was forced, and smiled. "What did you think I was going to say?" she asked slyly, stopping to see his reaction. I have. What makes you think I thought you were thinking of saying anything?" He didn't meet her eye when he said this. Her smile broadened. "Well, do you want me to finish my question?" she said. Harry still didn't look at her. Nor did he answer, but stared at the lake. I think I just saw a mermaid," he said, shifting his shoulders uncomfortably and squinting at the still surface of the lake. This time Hermione began to laugh. "What?" Harry asked, finally looking at her. "If you're going to avoid conversation, then why'd you bring me out here?" "What makes you think I'm avoiding conversation?" Harry asked innocently, suddenly becoming very interested in the different lengths of moonlit grass at his feet. "Just the whole," she forced a fake cough, "and the look. There's a mermaid, kind of gave you away." She laughed. "Oh, well, I'm sorry, it was obvious. Please continue." "Serious?" "Oh, yeah, he's great," says Lupin's great too. His laugh seemed rather choked. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked, stopping again. But this time, Harry continued to walk. Did what?" Hermione gave him a look that clearly said, "Oh, yeah, and you have no clue." Harry smiled weakly. "You sent the Hermione, it's a school night. Quote. Funny, you didn't seem to care a moment ago," she muttered. Harry began to head back to the castle when Hermione stopped him. "Harry, why did you bring me out here anyway?" she asked timidly, not wanting to put a lot of pressure on the question in fear he might not answer. Harry shrugged. "I just wanted to know if you had a good time with Ron on Halloween." He nodded, not looking at her, but at the lake once more. "You could have asked me that any time," she pointed out matter-of-factly. "Well, did you?" His breath caught in his throat as he said this, making him turn his head further away as he coughed. She smiled. "It was great." She seemed to be reasoning with herself more so than Harry. "Really great or great?" He pressed on, finally meeting her eyes. "It was wonderful," she said simply, thinking of her talk with Cho and all the reassurance it had brought. "Oh," he stared back down at the grass. "What?" she said, slowly beginning to walk towards him, trying to catch his eye. What's wrong? Nothing, he said quickly, making Hermione narrow her eyes in suspicion. Really, Harry, you can talk to me. He gave a low, hollow chuckle. Not about some things. His words were breathless and barely distinguishable. What? She repeated, becoming quite irritated. Guy stuff, now come on, let's go in, it's getting cold. I'm not moving from this spot until you tell me, she said stubbornly, jabbing a finger toward the ground then crossing her arms. Harry rolled his eyes. Don't make this difficult. Tell me. Sighing, he approached her. Hermione was uncertain on what he had planned but she sensed it was going to work. Reaching her he flung one arm around her waist and proceeded back to the castle, dragging her behind high. Emma ignoring her constant struggles and whines about how dirty he was making the heels of her tennis shoes. He stopped in front of the great oak doors, setting her back on her feet and put a finger to his lips. Tell me, she repeated stiffly. Harry however did not acknowledge her but smirked and slipped the cloak over the two of them. On their way through the castle she couldn't help but notice how heavy Harry's breathing was. They turned into a passage Hermione was unfamiliar with. Stopping suddenly he took a deep breath and seemed to be content on a decision. With a mighty tug he pulled her into a door to their right. Hermione dropped the cloak and looked around. Harry, what are you doing? She whispered, watching Harry pace back and forth. He seemed very disturbed and didn't answer. Harry, what? Oh, I thought I heard voices, he said flatly. The room seemed to be an unused classroom judging by the dust building steadily on the desks. She looked once more at Harry, running his fingers distractedly through his hair, muttering strange things under his breath. Harry, what are you? Hermione, kiss me. What? This statement registered ever so slowly through her brain. It was a rather bizarre request. You heard me. I want you to kiss me. What? Why? She sputtered, elated with shock. She found herself glued to the spot as Harry stumbled up to her, looking hopeful. He shrugged, because I want you to. But you why? She managed, blinking furiously in confusion. I'm surprised to actually find you at a loss for words, he muttered, leaning close to her. What about Cho? She asked, regaining movement in her limbs and placing her hands quickly on Harry's chest. Kiss me now and I'll explain in a moment, sound fair? He said, smiling. As much as Hermione wanted Harry to ask her such a question, she didn't know how to answer. Promise, she whispered, deciding to keep her answer simple and leaning back slightly as Harry took her wrists and brought them around his neck. Closing the very little distance there was left between them he kissed her, again. Hermione felt that desire rush back through her veins, her heart pumping madly. A show of bright, colorful lights shot before her, making her blood run hot, like in a tub of boiling water. The feeling was of passion she had imagined but never felt. She arched her shoulders a tad as Harry ran his hands soothingly down her arms only to wrap them around her back, pulling her closer. It was total bliss, and only ended when they parted. The flashes of bright light danced on the back of her eyelids a moment before she opened them. She ran a hand through his hair. I suppose you're still waiting for that explanation, Harry whispered, smiling contently. To be completely truthful, it had completely slipped my mind, she admitted, her eye only half open. Damn it. She laughed again and let her hands fall down his back before dropping them to her sides. However, Harry didn't let go. Harry, if you're going to tell me, it's probably best if we sit down, she suggested. Oh, right, he muttered, not moving. Well, in order to sit down you have to let me go, she continued, placing her hands on his and trying to loosen his grip. No, I don't want to, he sniggered, shaking his head and reminding her forcibly of her 3-year-old cousin in America. But we can sit down, that is, if you want to, he reasoned. Yes, I do, but, and before Hermione could stop him he had leaned back so her feet weren't touching the ground and staggered to the nearest chair. Sitting down he shifted her in his lap and cradled her like a small child. There was a moment in which the two stared at each other. When Hermione broke the gaze Harry also began to laugh. Well, Harry began, in short, as pretty as I find Cho, there's something you have she never will. Quote. Hermione stared at him, puzzled. And what's that? She asked. He smiled at her, though not his usual smile, it seemed deeper to Hermione. A sense of self, he whispered, leaning close to her. Again, she stared at him. Well, Cho does things because other people do things, and that shows no, he struggled for words. Strength of character, Hermione said helpfully. Harry nodded. And that's why I consider you a much closer friend than I do Cho. Hermione began to nod but stopped. Friend. What kind of friend kisses his friend like that? The smile on her face vanished. She stared down then closed her eyes. Friend. Never did she think this word could be so painful. There was a sharp pain in her chest, similar to those she suffered from during gym in elementary school. However, this pain was deeper, and only became more painful the longer she sat there. Hermione. Look, she struggled to her feet. I better go. Hermione. What's wrong? Rai asked as she laid a hand on the doorknob, unable to look at him and ignoring the invisibility cloak. Her eyes began to sting from the tears she fought to hold back. Yes, she had been a fool, no use denying it. But on top of being a fool she had been wrong. Wrong about Harry, and the notes, wrong about love and its meanings. She continued to open the door when Harry spoke again. Hermione, look at me. Hermione. Is that all I mean to you, Harry? A friend. She tried desperately to keep her voice normal, though with every tear she choked back her voice became thicker. Hermione, Harry whispered. She heard the old chair groan as he stepped cautiously across the floor. I would do anything for you. But that's it, I'm still just a friend. My best friend. He said. She knew he was right behind her. She couldn't yell and if she turned around too late. Your best friend. She hollered in complete rage, turning on him. Is that all I mean to you, Harry Potter? Harry backed languidly up against the wall, dumbfounded at her explosion as she advanced on him. I loved you so much, Harry. Tears were now streaming freely down her face, as her voice became hoarse. She stopped and stared at him, her finger still raised to his chest. The silence between them was filled with confusion, anger, and regret. It nearly weighed her breathing down, pushing on her chest. Harry was the first to find his voice. You love me. He swallowed hard. In sudden regret Hermione drew a deep breath, closing her eyes, wondering what she wouldn't have given to disappear on the spot, even if it did mean finding herself in the Sahara Desert. She turned slowly and began to walk away, only to groan at the door, thinking her luck couldn't have gotten any worse. It had. Argus Filch stood, barring down at the two. Miss Norris purring cruelly at his side. Hermione didn't find it at all mysterious that Filch had found them. What with all the noise she was making, Hermione was surprised the whole Taff hadn't been waiting for her in the corridor. She heaved a low exhausted sigh, wondering what else could go wrong. Come with me, Filch grinned loftily. Hermione dared not look at Harry as she whipped the tears harshly from her face. Too annoyed and enraged to be scared. She turned and swept silently through the corridors after Filch and soon found herself stepping into Filch's shabby office. Oh. The teachers will most certainly hear about this. He muttered gleefully, practically flying behind his desk and shuffling papers triumphantly. Hermione let out another sigh and seated herself, arms crossed, in a musty chair in front of Filch's desk. Keeping her head bowed, determined not to look at Harry, Hermione began to count off the number of rules they had broken as Filch named them aloud while scribbling on their forms. Unable to sit down in all his glory, he took to dancing around behind his desk. As her anger slowly died away, a much less welcome emotion took its place, pure shame. She hung her head and slumped in the chair. Filch's constant muttering made her feel much worse. 2 students out of bed in one night. How wonderful, we've been needing the bubble gum scrapped off the desks for a while now, oh yes. And the bathrooms, he sniggered, continuing his quickstep. Hermione suddenly stopped and looked at Harry, wide-eyed, for the first time. As she looked at him she saw the color slowly drain out of his face, the invisibility cloak. She propped her arm on the edge of the chair, resting her cheek on her hand. Now what? Harry and Hermione were escorted by Filch back to the portrait hole. Slipping inside, Hermione walked stiffly to the girls' staircase, not saying anything to Harry, much less looking at him. Her speed slowed as she reached her dorm and her eyes filled with tears. Why? She thought miserably, why did he call me and after he kissed me? She curled up on top of her sheets, not bothering to stop the steady flow of tears that itched as they skimmed her nose and fell. Hermione missed Quidditch practice the next morning, even if the game was in 2 days, she didn't care. She also felt like calling sick and not going to herbology, and to her relief, it was cancelled. With one whole class gone, Hermione headed for the library. She'd passed a window and stopped. Stepping back, she glanced briefly out the lower pane and almost smiled. Ron and Harry were heading down to Hagrid's when Ron hit Harry in the head with a snowball. She hung her head and continued down the deserted hall to the library. With the library in sight, she was suddenly grabbed. Her books hit the floor with a clatter that echoed around the empty hall. Her attempted screams for help were muffled by a giant hand. She knew there were two of them, one holding her off the ground around the waist and restraining her hands. The other had their hand around her mouth and upper arm. She struggled, in utter shock and surprise. Unable to look behind her and too afraid to close her eyes, she stared straight ahead. A silver-haired boy trotted triumphantly in front of her. Well, no Potter to save you now, is there, Miss Granger?" He smirked. Malfoy's sneer widened as Hi's eyes caught sight of the wand in her right pocket. She struggled harder, but knew it was no use. Pocketing her wand, Malfoy raised his own. "Silentius," he hissed, sending a blue ribbon swirling around her head and vanishing. She didn't have to try to talk to know what Malfoy had done. He jerked his head in the direction of a room off the hall and Hermione was carried in. She now knew who must have hold of her, if Malfoy was with them. Her arms were tied behind her back, which she didn't see why. She no longer had her wand and the room was bare besides a couple of musty desks and unused cauldrons. She watched Malfoy lock the door as she was released. For a fleeting instant Hermione considered scurrying to the corner or taking shelter under a desk, but threw her head back with trembling pride. And glared at Malfoy, who began to laugh. "No Potter to save you here," he repeated, malice gleaming in his eyes. "He's out visiting the oaf, Hagrid, but I suspect you already knew that." He began to circle her, like a vulture. Hermione remained stiff as a board, her spine tingling with a mixture of horror and rage. Crabbe and Goyle gawked stupidly behind her. Hermione opened her mouth to ask Indy Nantley for a fair duel when she remembered that his spell enabled her to talk, and closed it again. "This," said Malfoy, advancing on her, "is exactly what I've been waiting for." He shoved her harshly up against the wall. Holding her up by her shoulders as to not let her slide down to the floor. He leaned in to kiss her when she raised her foot out of denial and instinct and kicked him hard in the stomach. Malfoy hit the floor with a grunt and Hermione saw her wand skid across the floor. Her attempted leap was disrupted by two tree trunks of arms catching her hard by the shoulders. Malfoy raised himself to his feet, but crouched in agony. Recovering to the point that he was able to straighten up, he turned his face to hers. His eyes were full of hate, and murder lit his features. Hermione aimed for the door but was stopped a second time. She struggled to free herself and stumbled forward when Malfoy raised his hand stiffly for them to release her. Hermione retreated to the door and began kicking helplessly at it. Draco slowly made his way toward her, his chin raised, as though he was truly sickened by her appearance. Hermione couldn't help but notice with great satisfaction the slight limp in his walk. She flattened her back against the wall and struggled to keep her breathing steady and her mind ready. In her state of horror, Hermione was quick to notice her wand, which still lay, forgotten on the floor. Visible between Malfoy's legs, her eyes shot from Draco to the wand and back again. Knowing she was soon to be cornered and there was a slim chance in which she may reach her wand without being turned into a frog. She dove straight through his legs, hit the floor, and slid a few feet on her right shoulder as the arm of her robes tore. She couldn't see behind her, but felt the tips of her fingers hitting her wand as she struggled to reach it. Her eyes were tightly shut, afraid to open in fear of seeing that sneer. Her fingers lashed wildly behind her back when she heard a quiet laugh, reminding her somewhat of a cackle. Reluctantly, she opened her eyes to see only what she predicted, a pale sneer. He loomed at her a moment and knelt over, lifting her wand from her reach. He turned it over and over in his hands, unable to keep the smirk from his face. Hermione was hit with a spur of the moment, beyond crazy idea. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her legs high off the ground and thrust, catching him once more in the stomach with the heels of her shoes. Her wand hit the floor again, but this time it was in her reach. In an instant Hermione had him at wand point, arms free. She was pleased to see the fear that shot through his once confident eyes. She raised her wand for a body bind but froze as the door swung open. "What is the meaning of this?" It was Professor McGonagall, pale and white-lipped. "Miss Granger, explain yourself." Hermione opened her mouth to insist it wasn't what it seemed but choked on her words as the last person needed it. Moment stalked out of the shadows behind what now seemed the gracious, understanding McGonagall, Professor Snape. Hermione hung her head, unable to look at Malfoy knowing he was smiling. Snape's eyes stroked the scene once and he grinned an awful, lustful grin. "Shall we take this to my office?" he asked silkily, smirking evilly at Hermione, who did not look up as she felt the knot in her throat slip a notch. "Thank you, Service," McGonagall said swiftly, motioning for the four of them to follow her. Head swinging against her chest, Hermione slumped after Professor McGonagall, closely followed by Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, with Snape bringing up the end. In fear of her reputation, the walk seemed nothing short of a step as they turned down the passages and into a most revolting room Hermione had yet to lay eyes on. Canned animal organs, or at least that's what she thought they were, displayed on the walls, all aglow with a stomach-churning green light. Snape's office. Malfoy took a seat and stared around contently, looking quite at home while his goons took to the shadows behind him. "Before we begin, need I ask if this is your second time in a staff member's office this week, Miss Granger?" Professor McGonagall asked coldly. Hermione swallowed hard, unable to look her professor straight in the eye. "Well," she barked. "Yes, ma'am," Hermione said in a very small, ashamed voice. "And if I were you, Mr. Malfoy, I wouldn't be smiling, would I, Service?" McGonagall said, eyeing him stiffly. Hermione was willing to bet 1,000 galleons she wasn't breathing. Of course not. However, Snape was still smiling. "Your detention will take place in my office, Mr. Malfoy, 8 o'clock on Sunday night, no excuses." He finished this with a chime in his voice, which McGonagall seemed to catch, as her voice grew harsher. "See me Monday, Miss Granger. After class we will arrange your detention, and do bring Mr. Potter. I do believe I owe him a detention also. 2 students out of bed in one night," she added in an undertone, shaking her head at the floor. At the sound of Harry's name, Malfoy coughed hard and stared wide-eyed at Hermione. She caught his gaze and watched, as he looked her up and down. A look of deep disgust furrowed his eyebrows. Hermione understood what he was implying, only to make it worse by adding a dirty smile and winking. She snorted at his reaction and turned back to the stone-faced professor. "Off you go, both of you," she snapped as Snape opened the door for them to exit. Once out of earshot of the Snape and McGonagall, Malfoy leaned over her shoulder. "You and Potter," he hissed, eyes gleaming. Hermione stopped, too angry to yell at him, but found the courage to have some fun. "Oh yes, every night. He truly is good, the best I've had so far, and last night," she licked her lips and raised her eyebrows suggestively at the look of utter shock and surprise on his face. With a skip of humor in her step, she headed for the Gryffindor Tower. She had but a minuet to log before pilling her books, which had been brought back to her dorm, in her bag and pranced down the corridors to History of Magic. Hermione hadn't planned on sitting with Harry or Ron but was forced to from the lack of seats. She seated herself on the far side of Ron and spoke to neither of them. As many times as she wished she to say, "Harry, write that down, it'll be on the exams." Or, "Ron, why isn't your quill moving? That's important." She held her tongue and kept her eyes on her own paper. Hermione awoke the following morning and quickly dressed for Quidditch, which now seemed more like work rather than play. With Harry on the team, Hermione only did what he said but did not reply. Nor did she answer when he asked what was wrong. Later that day, after a tiring practice, Hermione followed the rest of the school down to Hogsmeade, the medallion sagging in her pocket and her arms wrapped around half-dozen books which might contain its secret, if there was one. She plopped down in a far corner of the 3 broomsticks and opened the top book. For the next hour she sat, sipping butterbeer and hitting one dead end after another. It was only when she began, "Jewelry with Meanings," that Hermione was bombarded with the sudden urge for fresh air. Lifting herself lazily, she hoisted the books into her arms. She trudged through the town, headed for no place in particular, just enjoying tea. The sun bounced off the bleach-white snow, sending a bright, yet cheery flash about the town. Taking a deep breath, her thoughts lingered on the upcoming Quidditch match that was to take place that afternoon. She wanted to win, to show Malfoy he wasn't all he thought he was. It was one thing when Gryffindor beat Slytherin, That happened all the time, but it was another when Hermione beat Draco. It felt so much more personal. Especially after their recent encounter. She shuddered. What would have happened if she had not gotten to her wand in time? She had a feeling it was way worse than detention. But she would beat him. She was a better player, not to mention a better person, than him. She took a deep breath, swelling with pride and anticipation. The sweet smell of fresh snow made her want to plop down in the middle of the road and just think. Knowing of only one place in which she wouldn't be disturbed, Hermione trudged up the hill toward the shrieking shack. Though it was winter, and the ground was covered with snow, the sun shone brightly, making her insides warm. Seating herself in front of the old broken shack, Hermione rested her chin on her hand. There was a sudden thump in her side, making her spin around wildly, only to find endless white covering rooftops, trees, and the street. She looked down at the mounds of snow and was rather spooked to find no footprints. She shrugged. It was nothing. Just the wind on this incredibly non-windy day, she added mentally. She stopped as she felt it again. Still, the snow was unmarked, which illuminated her first thought of a certain boy under a certain cloak. She frowned. Was she just imagining it? Yes, of course she was. Standing up, feeling rather jumpy and wanting to be amongst people for stability of the mind, she lifted the books into her arms once more and dropped them almost immediately. Her pocket was jumping. It twitched and flopped, jerking outwards and every which way. She quickly laid her hands over top of it, as if to tame her excited pocket. Knowing how strange it must look, it jumped under her fingers, pulling her in the direction of the shrieking shack. Quickly reaching inside her robes, she yanked out the medallion. It was still in her grasp, or at least it had been. With an almighty jerk, she found herself face down in the snow, clinging to the medallion, which hovered above the frozen ground, pulling her forward. The medallion jabbed wildly at the fence surrounding the shack and tugged hard at her arms. It seemed to be looking for a way around the fence. Clutching it tightly, she swung out her wand. With a jagged wave, a hole materialized through the boards of the fence and she was quickly pulled through by her fist, trying desperately to keep up with the speed of the medallion. She was paw-ing hard as it pulled her swiftly around one corner after another. Hermione had had no idea how large the shrieking shack was until she had run what she hoped was at least half its perimeter. With a jolt, it hit a red oak door covered in wood paneling and fell out of her hand to the ground. She ran her fingers over the paneling wonderingly, looking it up and down. Surely this paneling wasn't there for no reason, but then again, it had been there for a reason, to keep people out. She furrowed her eyebrows, but wasn't the fence enough? Gripping the top panel of wood in front of her, she braced herself and pulled, but to no avail. She propped a foot on the door and shoved hard with her leg as her muscles strained on the wood and her fingers were pricked by small splinters, but the board did not make so much as a squeak. Feeling the need to be hit upside the head with a heavy object, she reached inside her pocket once again. Pulling out her wand, she aimed for the rusty nails bearing the board to the door. "Lucendium," she whispered, feeling the sudden need for silence. The board swung loosely and the nails fell from one side. Before she was able to lift her wand again, she stopped, even her breathing ceased. On the old rusty door was an indentation, a hand. A mental picture of her own hand stamped into pan of plaster from second grade reached her mind and she smiled slightly. Leaning closer, why she stared at the marking etched lightly in the wood. No lines were rounded, and it reminded her somewhat of a stick figure. A bird, in mid-flight, long plumage lay behind it and it seemed to glow with color the longer she looked at it. Raising her hand, she lifted it to the indenture. She realized she was shaking, maybe she was just cold, and inhaled deeply. Squeezing her eyes firmly shut, she clenched her teeth, and with all the courage she could muster, forced her hand forward. Opening her eyes, she had but a split second to gasp at the fit before a blue light shot along the door, outlining her hand. She brought her arm down quickly and stared at her palm, which seemed incredibly, yet disappointingly, normal. She frowned, unsatisfied. Looking back at the door, she was exceedingly irritated to find the door in the imprint exactly as she had found it under the board. Knowing something must have happened, she tried the rusty gold doorknob. Shaking it madly, she slammed her fist against the door in anger. Why wasn't it working? Hermione. She turned quickly on the spot only to relax at the sight of Ron. He was staring uncertainly at her, though his stature was that of concern. "What's going on? Are you okay?" His eyes lingered on the door in surprise before he turned to Hermione was for some strange reason on the verge of tears. What was wrong with her? Nothing. Nothing was wrong. I'm fine, she insisted, tears thick in her voice. Are you sure? Do you want me to go get Harry? He asked solemnly, taking a step closer with his hands motioning behind him back to the town. It seemed to echo in her ears. His name, it was like it was trapped in her head. She wasn't emotional, she was frustrated, and the door was just one more thing to be upset about. But no, it wasn't just the door, it was Harry. It was all the dead ends she continuously hit, it was everything, Draco, her fight for someone who wanted someone else. She was unable to take any more of it, to keep it all concealed in her head. She could only take so much. With the force of an earthquake she cracked. No, forget Harry. What do you think? I can't survive without him? She screeched, throwing her arms back, ignoring Ron's continuous stutters. She seemed to just be yelling, at no one in particular, just letting it all out, to everyone. Oh no, I can't live without Harry Potter and his kung fu dits. Tay. Ours flooded down her cheeks freely now as she hung her face in her hand, Ron shaking his head slightly, trying desperately to vocally comfort her. No, I'm fine. Somewhat awkwardly, he grabbed her in a firm grip and hugged her. She buried her face in his shirt, shaking her head. Who needs him when you're fine? She sobbed. I'm okay, I'm fine. All right, I'm fine. Okay, you're fine, I believe you. Shish, he whispered, stroking her hair and rocking slightly. She clutched the back of his robes and sniffled. Smiling, he looked down at her humorously. Kung fu dits. It was with intense resent. Meant to everything around her that Hermione found herself standing on the snowy Quidditch field with a broom in one hand and a glare on her face. But truly it was Ron that seemed concerned by her strange behavior. Harry more so tried to avoid her eye and keep his distance. Madame Hooch was completely unfazed at the fact one of the Gryffindor chasers was on the verge of going off at a certain seeker. That happened to be wearing scarlet robes. However, as mad as she was at Harry, she was determined to keep her head and beat Slytherin, beat Malfoy, not out of support on the bleachers, but beat them on the field. She smiled at the remembrance of how Harry had walked into the locker rooms to give his usual pep talk only to see her face and turn right back around. She was brought back from her trio. MP Hant rather recent memory by rather unpleasant sound of an uptight Madame Hooch. She seemed very distrusting due to the fact the last Gryffindor Slytherin match contained a lot of fouls. Mount your brooms, she hollered, raising a silver whistle to her lips. With the shrill of a whistle and a roar from the crowd, the 14 rose into the air. The end. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.